In 1859, 17 enslaved people walked out of Vale Plantation after midnight because a white man told them freedom was waiting at the river. They did not run from him. They followed him. By sunrise, their cabins were empty, their food left cold, their children's things still hanging by the door. The owner said he had set them free. But years later, a notebook buried beneath a cabin floor told a different truth. Freedom had not come for those 17 souls. Only their names had been released. Their bodies had been taken somewhere else. Before we go deeper into the darkness of Vale Plantation, comment below where you're listening from tonight. Your city, your state, your country. Because this is the kind of story America buried in ledgers, church books, and polite lies. And if history has taught us anything, it is that the truth often survives in the places powerful men forget to search. Vale Plantation stood low against the Louisiana river country, where the air hung wet over the cane fields, and the road to the landing turned black after rain. By day, the place looked like wealth made orderly. White columns, trimmed hedges, a main house set back from the dirt road, a sugar mill with its chimney rising above the quarters like a warning, barrels stacked near the storehouse, ledgers locked in the office. Names written in ink by men who believed ink was stronger than memory. Behind the house, past the cookhouse and the wash line, the cabins stood in 2 uneven rows. They were not drawn on the plantation map with any care. On paper, they were only structures. In life, they held marriages, babies, whispered prayers, hidden grief, and the fragile pieces of family that slavery had not yet managed to break apart. The owner of that place was Edmund Vale. In public, Vale had the manners of a gentleman and the voice of a man who knew how to be admired. He spoke softly. He did not shout when visitors were present. He quoted scripture at supper and used the word mercy as if it belonged to him. Other planters called him unusual. Northern guests, when they passed through, called him enlightened. Even men who disliked him admitted he understood how the world was changing. By 1859, rumors of war had already begun to move through the South like heat lightning. Men argued in courthouse squares. Newspapers used words like crisis and union and secession. In the quarters, those words traveled differently. They came as fragments overheard through open windows, as whispers carried from town, as warnings from boatmen at the landing. Something was coming. No one knew what shape it would take. Edmund Vale knew how to use that uncertainty. He had built a reputation on restraint. He allowed a preacher to visit the quarters. He permitted hymns on certain nights. He let it be known that he disliked cruelty, as though disliking cruelty made ownership clean. This was one of the oldest tricks of American slavery, the cruel system hiding behind the polite man. The people in the cabins understood the difference. They knew that a soft voice could still give an order. They knew that a clean coat could still carry the smell of the auction room. They knew that the man who did not raise his hand could still sell a child by signing a page. Among them was Isaiah. He was a man in his early 40s, broad-shouldered, quiet, and careful with his eyes. He had learned long ago that looking too directly at a white man could be called defiance, and looking too low could be called guilt. So Isaiah looked just enough. He listened more than him he spoke. He repaired tools, carried messages, watched doors, and remembered things other people thought he had not noticed. Isaiah could read. That fact alone could have destroyed him. He had learned as a boy from a woman in the main house who had mistaken kindness for innocence and innocence for safety. She taught him letters from a primer, then Bible lines, then receipts. When she died, the lessons stopped, but the knowledge remained. Isaiah hid it the way some men hid a blade. At night, when the cabin settled and the main house lamps burned low, Isaiah took out a small notebook wrapped in cloth and kept beneath a loose board. In that notebook, he wrote names, not the names Vale used in his ledgers. The real ones: Naomi Bell, mother of Ruth, Moses Bell, born near Baton Rouge, sold twice before he was 20. Lydia Carter, carrying a child. Samuel Carter and Ben Carter, brothers, though the Plantation book listed them as unrelated males. Josiah Green, 14 years old, hungry for letters. Isaiah wrote births, deaths, marriages, kinship, songs, scars, old places, remembered mothers, missing fathers. He wrote what the plantation tried to scatter. He wrote because slavery's first theft was not the body, it was the record. It was the right to say, I was here and I belong to someone who loved me. That notebook was not just paper, it was resistance. One evening in late summer, a houseboy came to Isaiah's cabin and told him Master Vale wanted him at the main house. The hour was wrong. Vale did not summon enslaved men to his office after supper unless he wanted something hidden from daylight. Isaiah washed his hands at the barrel, dried them on his trousers, and walked across the yard. The main house windows glowed yellow. Insects struck against the glass. Somewhere behind him, a child coughed inside one of the cabins. The sound followed him all the way to the steps. Vale was waiting in the office. A lamp burned on the desk. Beside it lay a stack of papers, a folded map, and a red wax seal. Reverend Silas Calloway stood near the bookcase with his hat in both hands, his face arranged into the solemn expression men use when they want sin to look like duty. Vale did not ask Isaiah to sit. He smiled instead. Isaiah, he said, there are times when a man must answer to his conscience. Isaiah said nothing. Vale touched the papers with 2 fingers. The country is changing. You know, though, everyone knows that. There may be war, there may be disorder. There are men in this parish who would rather burn their own fields than see the old ways questioned. He paused, watching Isaiah carefully. I intend to do what I can before that day comes. Calloway lowered his head as if the room had become a chapel. Vale continued. He said arrangements had been made, quiet arrangements. Certain people from the quarters would be moved at night to the river, then placed with friends beyond the reach of local interference. He used the word freedom. He used it slowly. He used it like bait lowered into dark water. Isaiah looked at the papers. There were names on them. 17 names: Naomi, Ruth, Moses, Lydia, Samuel, Ben, Josiah, others from the cabins, people with children. People with old grief, people who had learned not to hope too loudly. Vale said the journey had to be secret, no shouting, no farewells beyond those necessary. No bundles too large, no questions at the landing. Patrols were watching. Neighbors would interfere. Other owners would accuse him of inciting unrest. It must be done quietly, Vale said, for their safety. There it was. The language of care placed over an order. Calloway stepped forward then and placed one hand on the papers. I have witnessed the documents, he said. Before God, I believe Mr. Vale is acting with mercy. Isaiah looked at the preacher's hand. He noticed ink beneath the thumbnail, fresh ink. The papers carried seals and signatures. They looked official. That was the danger. Evil rarely comes wearing a mask when a document will do. A signature can make a crime look respectable. A seal can make a disappearance look lawful. Why them? Isaiah asked. Vale's face did not change. Because I cannot move everyone at once. Why not me? A smaller smile now. You are useful here and trusted. Your time will come. That was when Isaiah understood that the room had more than one purpose. Vale was not simply informing him. He was testing him. He wanted Isaiah to carry the news back to the cabins. He wanted hope delivered by a familiar voice. A lie travels farther when it is placed in the mouth of someone trusted. Isaiah was dismissed. He walked back through the dark, with the list burning in his mind. At the edge of the quarters, Naomi Bell was waiting outside her cabin. She had already heard enough to be afraid and not enough to protect herself. What did he say? She whispered. Isaiah looked at her, then at Ruth, asleep on a blanket just inside the door. He says there is a way out. Naomi covered her mouth. In another cabin, Moses Bell sat awake with his walking stick across his knees. Lydia stood with one hand on her stomach. Josiah Green hovered near the doorway, trying to look like a man and failing because his eyes were too young. The news moved cabin to cabin without becoming loud. That was how hope had to move under slavery. Quietly, carefully, like something illegal. Some wept, some prayed, some did not believe it, some wanted to believe so badly that disbelief felt like betrayal. Isaiah watched them and felt the cruelty of the trap before he could name it. Freedom was not just a promise to these people. It was the one word strong enough to make a mother wake her child in the dark and follow the man who owned her. Later that night, Isaiah took out his notebook. He wrote the 17 names again. Then he wrote them a second time, slower. Naomi Bell, Ruth Bell, Moses Bell, Lydia Carter, Samuel Carter, Ben Carter, Josiah Green. He stopped after each name as if the act of writing could hold them in place. From the main house, a bell rang once, not the field bell. A smaller bell, a house bell, a signal. Doors opened along the quarters. 17 people stepped into the night carrying cloth bundles, blankets, and the stunned silence of people afraid to wake from a dream. Vale stood near the road with 2 lanterns covered in blue cloth. Calloway murmured a prayer. His words were soft enough to sound holy and vague enough to hide anything. No one shouted, no one resisted. That was the part later generations would misunderstand. They would ask why no one ran, why no one fought, why anyone followed. But people who ask that have never understood the violence of hope. They have never understood what it means to live in a world so narrow that even a dangerous door looks like mercy. Naomi lifted Ruth into her arms. The child stirred but did not wake. Before she stepped onto the road, Naomi looked back. For 1 second, her eyes found Isaiah. She smiled through tears. It was not a happy smile. It was a woman trying to believe that the world had finally opened. Isaiah did not smile back. He stood in the darkness and watched the lanterns move away from the cabins, down the road toward the river. The wheels of the wagon had been wrapped to soften their sound. Even the horses seemed trained not to disturb the night. By morning, the cabins would be empty. The bowls would still be on the tables. The baby cloth would still hang by the door. And Edmund Vale would tell the parish that he had done a righteous thing, but the truth had already begun to rot beneath the clean language. 17 people had walked out of Vale Plantation believing freedom was waiting at the river, and the men who led them knew the river was only the first lie. Reverend Silas Calloway had built his life on the careful arrangement of words. He knew which words made suffering sound temporary. He knew which words made obedience sound holy. He knew which words turned a plantation into a household, an owner into a guardian, and bondage into what men like him called order. On Sundays, he stood in a small white church 2 miles from Vale Plantation and preached to planters from polished wood. His voice carried well. It had weight without anger, tenderness without risk. He spoke often of charity. He spoke of duty. He spoke of God's design with the confidence of a man who had never been forced to live beneath another man's design. When he came to the quarters, he changed his tone. There, he softened it. He read scripture slowly, as though the pace itself were kindness. He told the people listening that patience was seen by heaven. He told mothers that grief had a reward beyond this life. He told men with tired hands and bent backs that rebellion began in the heart before it reached the body. He never said the word freedom unless Edmund Vale was present. That was part of the arrangement. Calloway understood the value of appearing merciful without threatening the structure that fed him. He was not the loudest defender of slavery in the parish. He did not need to be. Loud men frightened people. Calloway reassured them. He gave religious language to the comfort of the powerful, and he gave religious warning to the pain of the powerless. That made him more useful than a brute. At Vale Plantation, his name carried weight. If Reverend Calloway signed a document, white men believed it had moral shape. If he placed his hand on a Bible, people assumed truth had entered the room. If he stood beside Edmund Vale while speaking of mercy, then even suspicion had to fight its way through the costume of righteousness. That was why Vale needed him, and that was why Isaiah feared him more than he feared men who shouted. The 17 chosen for the night journey were told little, but each was told enough to obey hope. Naomi Bell was among the first called. She was 32 years old, though Vale's records listed her younger when it suited him and older when it suited him. She worked in the wash yard and the kitchen, moving between heat and water until her hands cracked in winter and swelled in summer. Her daughter Ruth was 6, small enough to be carried, old enough to remember fear. Naomi had been sold away from her mother at 12. She did not speak of it often, but Isaiah had written the mother's name in Barahmana's notebook because Naomi had once whispered it to him during a storm when thunder covered the sound of grief. Her mother's name was Adeline. Naomi had made Isaiah repeat it back to her 3 times before she trusted that he had remembered it correctly. Moses Bell was not Naomi's father by blood, but in the quarters, blood was not the only way family survived. Moses had been on 3 plantations before Vale's. His left knee had never healed properly after an old field injury. He carried a cane made from pecan wood and spoke rarely except to correct children who forgot the names of their grandparents. Lydia Carter was carrying a child. Everyone knew it. The women knew it first, then the men, then the children, then finally the plantation records caught up in their cold and useless way. Lydia's husband had been sold south the previous winter. Vale's ledger listed her as unattached. Isaiah's notebook did not. Samuel and Ben Carter were brothers, born 2 years apart, tied together by habit and by memory. The plantation book called them separate males of field age. It did not record that Samuel had once carried Ben through floodwater when they were boys. It did not record that Ben saved half his food for Samuel during fever season. Ledgers are very good at counting bodies. They are very poor at recording love. There was also Josiah Green, 14, thin, watchful, and restless. He had learned 3 letters from markings on barrels at the sugar house and believed, with the dangerous faith of the young, that if he could learn the rest, he might one day write himself into a world that could not deny him. These were not symbols. They were people. That matters because the crime being prepared against them depended on turning them into something less than people before the night was finished. After the meeting in Vale's office, Isaiah was sent back to the quarters with instructions to keep the matter calm. Calm, in the mouth of Edmund Vale, meant silent. He gave no public announcement. No written notice was posted. No family discussion was permitted beyond the cabins. The selected 17 were told to prepare only what could be carried in one hand. Too much baggage would slow the route. Too many questions would endanger everyone. Too many tears might wake the wrong ears. That was the explanation. It sounded practical. Most traps do. Inside Naomi's cabin, she tied Ruth's spare dress into a cloth bundle, then untied it, then tied it again. Her fingers would not settle. Ruth sat on the floor with one shoe on and one shoe beside her knee, watching her mother move through the room. "Are we going to the free place?" the child asked. Naomi stopped. There are questions no mother should have to answer while owned by another human being. But slavery produced such questions daily, then punished the honesty required to answer them. "Yes," Naomi said at last. "That is what they told us." Ruth looked toward the door. "Is Isaiah coming?" Naomi did not answer quickly enough. Across the lane, Moses Bell wrapped a shirt around a small tin cup and placed it inside a flour sack. He took his cane, then set it down, then took it again. An old man does not trust a journey that begins with another man deciding what he may carry. Lydia sat with two women from the next cabin while they helped her fold a baby cloth. She was trying not to cry, not because she lacked fear, but because she knew fear could be contagious. In the quarters, one person's panic could bring punishment down on 20 heads. Samuel and Ben Carter stood outside their doorway, speaking in low voices. "We follow them to the river," Samuel said. "And after that?" Ben asked. Samuel looked toward the main house, where the lamps burned steady and yellow. "After that, we watch." That was all any of them had. Isaiah moved from cabin to cabin, carrying the message he hated himself for carrying. He told them the hour, he told them the road, he told them to keep the children quiet. He did not tell them he trusted Vale. He did not say the papers were true. He did not bless the plan, but he also did not stop it. That fact would live in him later like an iron nail. He had reasons. A man under slavery always had reasons. No weapon, no authority, no court, no safe place to accuse a white owner of fraud. No proof except the tremor in his own bones when he looked at the documents. Suspicion could save no one if spoken too soon. Suspicion could kill everyone if spoken in the wrong ear. Still, reasons do not soften memory. Near midnight, Reverend Calloway arrived. He came in a dark coat, carrying a Bible and a leather satchel. He did not come like a man entering danger. He came like a man arriving at a scheduled appointment. Edmund Vale stood near the edge of the road beside two covered wagons. The lanterns had blue cloth tied around them to dim the light. The wheels had been wrapped with strips of old sacking to quiet the wood and iron. Isaiah saw that detail and felt his stomach tighten. This was not improvisation. This had been planned down to the sound of departure. Calloway gathered the 17 near the road. No one from the main house came to say farewell. No white neighbor stood witness. No document was read aloud. The freedom they were being promised had no ceremony, only darkness and instructions. The preacher opened his Bible. His prayer was brief. He asked the Lord to guide the travelers. He asked for protection from wicked men. He asked that the road ahead be hidden from hostile eyes. He did not ask forgiveness for anyone in authority. Men like Calloway rarely did. Their prayers always placed danger somewhere outside themselves. Naomi held Ruth tightly against her side. Moses leaned on his cane. Lydia kept one hand beneath her belly. Josiah Green stared at the wagons as if he could force the future to reveal itself by looking hard enough. Vale moved among them with a calm that should have frightened them more than it did. "You must trust the instructions exactly," he said. "No names spoken at the landing, no answering strangers. No turning back once we begin." No names spoken. Isaiah heard it, so did Moses Bell. The old man lifted his head slightly. "Why no names?" Moses asked. Vale turned to him. "For safety." That answer had already been used too often that night. Calloway stepped in before the silence widened. "The road to mercy is sometimes narrow," the preacher said. It was an obscene sentence. Not because it was loud, but because it was useful. It turned concern into weakness. It made obedience sound sacred. It asked frightened people to mistake secrecy for protection. Isaiah watched Calloway's face as he spoke. The preacher did not look at Ruth. He did not look at Lydia's stomach. He looked over them, beyond them, as if already seeing a record in which all of this had been made clean. The selected 17 began to board, not all at once. One family at a time, quietly, carefully, the same way people enter a church. A child whimpered and was hushed. A bundle fell and was picked up. Moses struggled with the wagon step, and Samuel Carter reached back to help him. Vale watched the gesture, then wrote something in a small book. Isaiah noticed that too. He noticed everything that night because nothing could yet be proven. Reverend Calloway came to him before the wagons moved. "You are troubled," he said. Isaiah kept his eyes low. "A man thinks many things at night." Calloway studied him. "Then think on providence. Mr. Vale is taking a great risk. There are men in this parish who would despise him for this kindness. Kindness. The word sat between them like a covered blade. Isaiah said, "The papers had mistakes." Calloway's expression did not shift, but his fingers tightened around the Bible. Papers are made by human hands. Heaven knows the true names. There are sentences that reveal more than confession. This was one of them. Heaven knows the true names, meaning the papers did not need to, meaning the world of law did not need to, meaning a name could be bent, shortened, replaced, or erased, and the preacher would call it harmless because God could sort out the damage later. That was how men like Calloway excused themselves. They assigned truth to heaven so they could falsify earth. Isaiah looked up then, only for a moment. "Does heaven read your ink, Reverend?" Calloway's face hardened just enough to show the man beneath the ministry. "You would do well," he said quietly, "to receive mercy without pride." Then he walked away. The wagons began to move. No one sang. No one prayed aloud. The horses stepped carefully through the dark. The road took them past the last cabin, past the wash yard, past the sugar mill where the machinery sat still and black, then toward the tree line that led down to the river road. Naomi turned once. Ruth's face rested against her shoulder, half hidden in cloth. Naomi's eyes found Isaiah in the dark. For 1 second, the whole lie depended on that look. She was asking him without words whether she should believe. Isaiah had no answer that could save her. The wagons passed beyond the last lantern glow. The sound faded. After a while, even the wrapped wheels could no longer be heard. The quarters did not sleep. People sat awake in cabins with doors cracked open. Mothers listened to the road. Men stared at the ground. Children sensed the fear of adults and remained quiet, which was itself a kind of accusation. A child should not know when silence is necessary for survival. Near dawn, Isaiah went back to his cabin and took out his notebook. He opened to the pages where the 17 names were written. He touched the paper, then added a mark beside each one, not a cross. Not yet. He would not give death to them without proof, but he marked them as taken from sight. Outside, the first gray light spread over Vale Plantation. By sunrise, Edmund Vale would tell the parish that 17 enslaved people had been removed under private manumission. Reverend Calloway would prepare the church record. White neighbors would argue over whether Vale was foolish, noble, dangerous, or vain. A northern newspaper months later would make him into a man of conscience. But in the cabins, the evidence remained plain. Ruth's second shoe was still under the bed. Moses Bell's old blanket still hung from a peg. Lydia's unfinished baby cloth lay folded near the hearth. Naomi's cooking spoon was still in its place. They had not packed like people beginning a new life. They had packed like people told the rest would follow. And that is where the official story began to crack. Not in a courtroom, not in a newspaper, not in the mouth of a preacher. It cracked in the small things left behind by people who believed they were coming back for them. Morning did not arrive cleanly over Vale Plantation. It came gray and heavy, with mist lying low over the cane and the river road still marked by the faint memory of wheels. The main house woke first, as it always did. Lamps were trimmed, water was carried. Doors opened and closed. The machinery of ownership resumed with its usual confidence, as if 17 people had not been taken into the dark hours before. In the quarters, no one moved with confidence. The cabins of the 17 stood open, not abandoned. Interrupted. That distinction mattered. Abandonment has a certain order to it. People who leave by choice take the small things that hold their lives together. A mother takes the second shoe. An old man takes the blanket that keeps his knees warm. A woman expecting a child takes the cloth she has been sewing for that child. A boy who dreams of letters takes the scrap of paper where he has copied the marks he knows. But those things remained. Ruth Bell's second shoe sat beneath the bed, turned on its side in the dirt. Naomi's cooking spoon hung from its peg beside the hearth. Moses Bell's blanket had been folded and left near the wall. Lydia Carter's baby cloth lay unfinished, the needle still caught in the edge, the thread pulled halfway through and left there. The cabins did not look like places people had left for freedom. They looked like places people had been told not to worry. They looked like the lie had entered gently. Isaiah walked through them before the sun had fully risen. He did not touch much. He did not need to. Evidence was everywhere, and none of it belonged to a court. It belonged to memory. It belonged to the quiet discipline of noticing what powerful men expected no one to preserve. In Naomi's cabin, he stood beside the bed and looked at the shoe. Ruth had worn it on Sundays when Reverend Calloway came to preach in the yard. Brown leather. Small brass buckle, scuffed at the toe. Isaiah remembered her dragging one foot when she was tired, leaving a little crescent mark in the dust. No mother taking a child to freedom would leave the child's shoe behind. In Moses Bell's cabin, the old man's cane was gone, but the blanket remained. That meant Moses believed the journey would be short, or warm, or temporary. More likely it meant someone told him there would be blankets waiting at the river. Men who deceive the vulnerable always learn the details of comfort. They know exactly what to promise. In Lydia's cabin, Isaiah found the unfinished baby cloth. He stared at it for a long time. A woman carrying a child does not leave preparation behind unless she believes she is walking toward something better prepared than herself. That was the cruelty of it. Not simply that she had gone, that she had been made to trust the hands arranging her departure. By breakfast, Edmund Vale had made his announcement. He did it from the rear steps of the main house, not from the quarters. That, too, was deliberate. He stood above the yard in a white shirt and dark waistcoat, with Reverend Calloway beside him and the overseer several paces behind. The remaining enslaved people were gathered below. No one had asked them to come. They had been ordered there. Vale spoke with the solemn restraint of a man presenting virtue. He said certain persons had been removed from the plantation under private manumission. He said they had been placed under protection. He said the matter had been handled at night to prevent interference from violent parties who opposed his conscience. He said no one was to speak of the route, the names of helpers, or the place of destination. Then he looked across the gathered faces. Questions, he said, would endanger them. It was a clever sentence. It turned concern into threat. If a mother asked where her sister had gone, she was endangering her. If a husband asked when he might hear from his wife's kin, he was endangering them. If Isaiah asked why the records were wrong, he was endangering the very people whose names had been damaged. This is how evil protects itself when it wears respectable clothes. It does not only lie. It makes the truth appear dangerous. Reverend Calloway stepped forward and added the blessing. He said those removed had entered a providential road. He said God had opened a door. He said not all mercy could be understood by those who received it. He warned against murmuring, against suspicion, against the pride of questioning instruments chosen by the Lord. The sermon was short. The warning was not. Afterward, the work bell rang. The plantation expected labor to continue. That was another fact worth recording. 17 people had disappeared in the night, and by morning the fields still demanded bodies. Cane still had to be cut, wash still had to be boiled, meals still had to be prepared for the house that had sent people into darkness and called it mercy. Isaiah worked that day with his face empty. He had learned emptiness as a shield. Grief shown too plainly could be punished. Anger shown too early could be used. So he bent over tools, carried sacks, listened to men speak, and built a record inside himself. At noon, he saw Vale near the plantation office with a visitor from town. The man wore a travel coat and carried a newspaper folded beneath one arm. He congratulated Vale in a low voice, but not low enough. "A bold Christian act," the man said. Vale gave a modest smile. We do what conscience permits. Conscience. The word stood there in daylight, clean and false. Within 2 weeks, the story had traveled beyond the parish. A short item appeared in a northern paper praising a Louisiana planter who had quietly released a number of enslaved persons at personal risk and expense. It did not name the 17. It did not ask where they had gone. It did not ask why children had been moved after midnight without witnesses. It did what newspapers often do when power hands them a polished lie. It printed the shine and ignored the blade. Reverend Calloway entered the names into the church book 3 days after the departure. Isaiah learned this from the church servant who cleaned the floors after service. The servant had seen the ledger open on Calloway's desk. The heading read, "Removed under lawful manumission and Christian protection." Lawful, Christian. Protection. 3 words placed like stones over a grave. That evening, Isaiah went to Naomi's cabin again. He took Ruth's second shoe and wrapped it in cloth, not to steal from the child, but to save proof that she had not been prepared for a long journey. He took nothing else. Too much missing would be noticed. Then he went to his own cabin, lifted the loose board, and opened his notebook. Beside Ruth's name, he wrote, "Left 1 shoe behind." Beside Lydia's name, "Baby cloth unfinished." Beside Moses, Belle's name, "Blanket left folded." Beside Naomi's name, "Cooking spoon still by hearth." These were small facts. Men like Vale relied on small facts being dismissed. They relied on the world believing that truth must arrive with seals, signatures, and witnesses in coats. But history is often corrected by smaller things. A shoe under a bed, a spoon on a peg, a needle left in cloth. A week passed. No letter came. Vale said the route was too dangerous for messages. 2 weeks passed. No word came from the north. No freed settlement sent thanks. No driver returned with news. No preacher in another parish wrote to confirm arrival. Vale said silence was proof of safety. That was when Isaiah began to move from suspicion into investigation. He waited until a moonless night. When the quarters had gone still and the main house lamps were out, he crossed behind the smokehouse and moved toward the plantation office. He knew the lock. He had repaired the door frame 2 years before and remembered how the wood sat loose near the lower hinge. He entered with a sliver of iron and a patience learned from fear. Inside, the office smelled of paper, tobacco, and lamp oil. The plantation ledgers sat in a cabinet. Vale's desk was clean except for an inkstand, a blotter, and a locked drawer. Isaiah did not waste time with what was meant to be seen. He searched the wastebasket first. Powerful men are careful with documents and careless with scraps. He found torn paper, not enough at first. A corner with an age. A line of numbers. A piece of a name. He gathered the fragments and carried them beneath his shirt back to the cabin. By candle stub, he pieced them together. The list was not complete, but it was enough. Naomi Bell had been copied as number 4. Ruth Bell had been copied as number 5, but not listed as a child. Her age was wrong. Her relation to Naomi was missing. Moses Bell was marked, old, obedient, limited field use. Lydia Carter was marked, breeding age, no dependence. Samuel and Ben Carter were marked separately with no brotherhood acknowledged. Josiah Green was marked, young male, trainable. Isaiah sat very still. The room around him seemed to narrow. This was the first layer of the crime, and it was uglier than fear had allowed him to imagine. The papers in Vale's office were not preserving freedom. They were stripping identity. The 17 had not been moved as families. They had been converted into categories. Able, young, female, old, trainable. Obedient, no dependence, no dependence. That phrase remained in Isaiah's mind longer than the others. Lydia Carter carried a child. Naomi had Ruth. Samuel had Ben. Moses had everyone who still called him elder. But the document erased relation because relation created claims. A mother might be searched for. A brother might be remembered. A child might ask for a name. A numbered body was easier to move. A falsified person was easier to sell. Isaiah put the torn list beside his notebook. Then one by one he wrote the truth against the lie. Naomi Bell, mother of Ruth. Ruth Bell, child of Naomi. Lydia Carter, wife of Daniel Carter, sold winter last. Samuel Carter, brother of Ben. Ben Carter, brother of Samuel. Moses Bell, elder of the East Row Cabins. Josiah Green, 14 years old, learning letters. He did not yet know where they had gone after the river. He did not yet know who had received them or whether all were still alive. But he knew this. The plantation had already begun killing them on paper, and paper was where white society preferred to commit its cleanest crimes. The next morning, Vale appeared satisfied. Calloway came for breakfast at the main house. The two men sat by the window as servants moved in and out with coffee and bread. Isaiah was sent to carry a repaired latch to the side porch, close enough to hear fragments. "No trouble in the quarters?" Calloway asked. "None worth naming," Vale said. "And the record?" "Settled." Calloway lowered his voice. "The names must remain settled." Vale answered, "They will." Isaiah kept walking. He did not turn his head. He did not change his pace. He carried the latch to the porch, set it down, and returned across the yard as though nothing in him had shifted. But something had shifted. Until then, he had been afraid the 17 had been deceived. Now he understood they had been processed. The difference was important. A deception might belong to one night. A process required a system. It required papers, witnesses, transport, buyers, silence. It required men like Vale, who could speak of conscience while editing children into merchandise. It required men like Calloway, who could open a church ledger and turn stolen people into a righteous entry. That evening, Isaiah returned to the empty cabins. He placed Ruth's shoe in his hidden box beneath the floor. He folded the torn scraps of Vale's list into the notebook. Then he wrote one sentence across the bottom of the page. They freed the names first. He stopped, listened to the night, and added the second sentence. Then they took the bodies where no one would know what to call them. Outside, the cane moved in the dark wind. From the main house came the faint sound of laughter after supper. Somewhere beyond the fields, the river carried its black water south, and in the quarters, 17 absences sat at 17 empty places, waiting for someone to prove that they had not vanished. They had been erased carefully, and the erasure had only begun. Isaiah waited 3 nights before he followed the road. He did not wait because he lacked courage. Courage was not the question. Courage without timing was only another way to die. He waited because the plantation was watching itself after the 17 were gone. Edmund Vale watched the quarters. The overseer watched Isaiah. Reverend Calloway came twice in 1 week and spoke with Vale behind the closed office door. Men who think they have completed a crime often become careless. Men who know the crime is still unfolding become precise. Isaiah needed them to believe the quarters had accepted the story. So he worked. He repaired a broken gate near the mule pen. He carried cane knives to the shed. He answered when spoken to. He kept his eyes low. He let grief appear as obedience. That was another skill slavery forced into black people, the ability to make survival look like submission. On the 4th night, the sky gave him cover. Clouds moved over the moon. Rain had fallen late in the afternoon, not enough to wash the road clean, but enough to soften the dirt. Wheel marks would hold. Boot prints would hold. A careless man's path would hold. Isaiah left his cabin after midnight with a sack over his shoulder and a short iron tool wrapped in cloth. If he was stopped, he would say he had been sent to check the smokehouse latch. If that failed, there would be no second explanation. On a plantation, An enslaved man found walking alone after midnight was already guilty of whatever the white man wished to name. He crossed behind the cabins, keeping low past the wash yard. The sugar mill stood black against the sky. The main house lamps were out except one in Vale's office. That light gave Isaiah pause. It burned steady behind the shutter, a thin yellow line. A man awake at that hour was either afraid, guilty, or waiting. Isaiah continued. The road used on the night of the departure did not lead toward the public ferry. That had troubled him from the beginning. If Vale truly meant to send people north, the ferry road was the obvious route. It had traffic, witnesses, known crossings. But the wagons had turned east first, then south through the Cane Road, toward old timber and abandoned river paths. Isaiah found the first clear track near a bend, where the road narrowed under live oaks. The wheel marks were faint but still there, pressed deep where the wagons had cut through wet ground. The strips wrapped around the wheels had left an unusual pattern, not the clean bite of iron, but a muffled, dragged edge. Isaiah crouched and touched the dirt. This was not proof a court would accept. It was proof a guilty man would fear. He moved on. The Plantation Road gave way to an older path used before the new ferry landing had been built. Few people went that way now. The trees grew close. Vines dragged at his legs. Once he stopped and listened as something moved in the brush. A hog, perhaps, a deer, perhaps a man. In that country, the difference mattered less at night than it did by day. After half a mile, he found the strip of cloth. It hung low on a thorn branch beside the road, dark with mud at one end. Isaiah lifted it carefully. Even before he brought it close, he knew the pattern. Naomi's headscarf had been faded blue with a small white stitch along the edge where she had mended it twice. This piece carried the stitch. She had passed here, not in a dream, not in rumor. Here. He folded the cloth and placed it inside his shirt. Farther down, the path dipped toward the river bottoms. The air changed. It grew colder, wetter, heavy with the smell of mud and rotting leaves. Frogs called from the dark. The river could not yet be seen, but Isaiah could hear it moving somewhere ahead, slow and secretive. The old landing appeared as a low shape between cypress trunks. It was not a proper dock anymore. Half the planks had sagged. The posts leaned. Cane trash and driftwood had collected against the bank, but the place had not been abandoned. The mud told the truth. Men had stood there recently. Horses had turned there. A boat had been tied there. Fresh rope marks cut pale lines into one of the posts. Isaiah knelt beside the water. A small bead lay pressed into the mud near the landing steps. Green glass. Ruth had worn a string of 3 beads around her wrist. Naomi had made it for her from broken decoration off an old dress that had once belonged to the main house. Isaiah had seen the child raise her hand during Calloway's prayers, turning the beads in the light because children will find beauty even in places designed to deny it to them. Now one bead sat in the mud at a hidden landing. Isaiah picked it up. The evidence was becoming personal. That was its strength and its danger. A prosecutor might dismiss a bead, a mother would not. A historian might call a torn cloth uncertain. A man who knew Naomi Bell would not. Near the dock, Isaiah found something else, a burned piece of cratewood. Most of the mark had been charred away, but 2 letters and a number remained. S4. Beneath that, a slash. Not a plantation mark, not a sugar barrel code he recognized. He turned the wood over and smelled it, burned recently. Perhaps used to destroy a label, perhaps dropped after a hasty fire. He wrapped it and hid it with the cloth. A voice sounded above the bank. Isaiah froze. 2 men were coming down the path, white men by the careless weight of their steps and the low confidence of their speech. Isaiah moved behind a cypress root and lowered himself into the mud. He held his breath until the first lantern appeared. One man was a boat hand from the sugar warehouse. Isaiah knew him by his limp and his laugh. The other was one of Vale's hired drivers, a narrow-faced man who never spoke to enslaved people unless giving an order. They stopped near the landing. "Too wet for another run this week," the boat hand said. The driver spat into the mud. "Vale wants it soon." "Vale can want what he likes. River's high." "There's talk of a second batch." The boat hand laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Long as the papers are clean." "They are. Preacher made sure of that." A pause, then the boat hand said, "No more name trouble. No names after the landing." That was the instruction. Isaiah felt the sentence enter him like cold water. No names after the landing. The driver continued, "Calloway's book already made them ghosts." There it was. Not a suspicion. Not a feeling. A spoken fact from a guilty mouth. Calloway's book already made them ghosts. The two men moved closer to the dock. Isaiah could see their boots through the cypress roots. One of them kicked at the mud. "Where'd the last ones go?" the boat hand asked. "Don't ask that." "I only asked, and I told you not to." Silence followed. Not innocent silence. The kind that forms when both men know the answer is dangerous. Then the driver lowered his voice. "South first, then split. Some across the basin, some farther down. New papers, new names. Buyers don't care what they were called before." The boat hand muttered something Isaiah could not hear. The driver answered clearly. "Once they're freed on paper, nobody searches the old register." Isaiah closed his hand around the green bead until it hurt. This was the shape of the operation. It was worse than a single betrayal. Edmund Vale was not merely selling people. He was passing them through a false doorway called freedom. On one side of that doorway they had names, families, histories, people who might remember them. On the other side, they became unclaimed bodies with altered descriptions and no legal trail back to the plantation. The state would not search for enslaved people recorded as manumitted. The church would not mourn people recorded as protected. The parish would not accuse a man praised for mercy. That was the genius of the crime, if one can use so clean a word for something so filthy. The records did not hide the disappearance. They explained it. They made absence look lawful. The men at the landing did not stay long. They checked the rope post, cursed the mud, and turned back up the trail. Isaiah remained still until their voices faded into the trees. Only then did he rise. His trousers were soaked, mud clung to his shirt. He moved to the dock and examined the post again. Beneath the new rope mark, he saw older cuts, many of them, some deep, some shallow. This landing had served more than one night's work. He searched the planks and found two more signs, a strip of red thread caught in a splinter and a dark scrape where something heavy had been dragged. Not blood, not enough to say that. The story did not need that kind of proof. The crime was already visible in the care taken to make it invisible. He followed the bank a short distance and found wagon ruts leading back from a second path. That meant the 17 had likely been brought to the landing by wagon, transferred to a boat, and moved under darkness. Whether they had resisted when the lie became clear, Isaiah did not know. He imagined Naomi asking where the northern road was. He imagined Moses Bell noticing the wrong men at the dock. He imagined Lydia standing with one hand over her child, understanding too late that no safe house waited beyond the river. He forced the images away. Grief could come later. Work had to come first. Before dawn, Isaiah returned to Vale Plantation by a different route. He passed the sugar warehouse just as the first kitchen fires were being lit. Two white workers were moving barrels under the shed. One of them complained about a shipment code being changed. "Use the S mark," the other said. "Mr. Vale said the river account goes under sugar loss." Sugar loss. Isaiah kept walking. In the plantation world, everything could be hidden inside a ledger if the right man held the pen. A broken barrel, a spoiled shipment, a debt transfer, a labor adjustment. a soul converted into an accounting problem. That morning, Isaiah was sent to repair shelving in the storehouse. It was not luck. It was surveillance. Vale wanted him near, visible, controlled. But control has a weakness. It often places the watched man close to what he needs. Inside the storehouse office, while the clerk stepped out to argue with the driver, Isaiah saw the river ledger lying open. He had only seconds. He looked. Sugar barrels were listed in one column, shipping marks in another, dates. Weights, losses, fees, then he saw it, S4. The same mark burned into the crate wood. Beside it was a date, the night after the 17 left. The entry did not list people. It listed damaged sugar and transport expense. A second mark appeared below it. S5, no date yet, blank beside it, prepared, waiting. The second batch. Isaiah stepped back before the clerk returned. His face gave nothing away. His hands continued their work. He lifted a shelf board and hammered 2 nails as if he had not just seen the next disappearance being written before it happened. By afternoon, Reverend Calloway arrived at the plantation. He came in a carriage, alone, with a leather satchel on the seat beside him. Isaiah saw the satchel when the preacher stepped down. It was thicker than usual. Calloway held it close, not like a Bible, not like a sermon book, but like a man carrying papers he did not want touched. Vale met him at the side entrance. They did not speak in the yard. They went straight to the office. Isaiah watched from near the tool shed. An hour passed. When Calloway came out again, the satchel looked thinner. That night, a house servant whispered what she had seen through the office door while carrying coffee. Blank certificates. A stack of them. Calloway had brought blank certificates with his seal already pressed. Isaiah returned to his cabin and opened the notebook. He placed Naomi's torn cloth, Ruth's bead, and the burned crate mark beside the pages of names. He wrote down the words he had heard at the landing. Second batch. No names after the landing. Calloway's book already made them ghosts. New papers, new names. Buyers don't care what they were called before. He wrote S4 beside the list of the 17. Then he wrote S5 beneath it and left a blank space. That blank space frightened him more than the filled one. A completed crime has victims. A prepared crime has targets. Outside, the plantation settled into night. In the main house, Edmund Vale dined under lamplight. Reverend Calloway's carriage tracks remained in the damp road. In the quarters, mothers pulled children closer without yet knowing why. Men spoke less. The air held the pressure of something approaching. Isaiah now understood. The river was not the end of the story. It was the crossing point. The place where a person's name was cut away from the body. The place where the church book, the plantation ledger, and the trader's route joined hands in darkness. The place where freedom was forged into a weapon. This was not mercy gone wrong. It was commerce wearing mercy's face. And somewhere beyond the black water, 17 people from Vale Plantation had been carried into a world where no one knew what to call them. The church stood 2 miles from Vale Plantation, painted white and kept clean enough to look innocent. That was the first lie. White paint has covered many things in American history. It has covered rot in wood, cracks in walls, and sins in institutions that learn to speak softly while helping power do its work. Reverend Silas Calloway's church was one of those places. By Sunday morning, it held hymnals, polished pews, pressed coats, and women with gloved hands. By certain nights, it held something else. Records, names, altered names. The church ledger was kept in a small office behind the pulpit, inside a locked cabinet beneath 2 shelves of sermon books. Calloway guarded it more carefully than he guarded the Bible. That alone told Isaiah what kind of truth lived inside. A Bible could be quoted in public. A ledger could accuse a man in private. Isaiah waited for rain. Rain changed the habits of white men. It emptied roads, delayed visits, softened footsteps, and gave sound to the roof so that small movements could hide beneath it. On the third night after Calloway brought the blank certificates to Vale's office, the sky opened over the parish. Water struck the cabin roofs. The yard turned slick. The cane bowed under the weight of it. Isaiah left after midnight. He carried no lantern. A lantern was a confession. Darkness was dangerous, but light belonged to people allowed to explain themselves. Isaiah had no such permission. He moved by memory, following the drainage ditch beside the road, then cutting through the trees behind the burial ground. Twice he stopped and lowered himself into the wet grass when riders passed on the main road. Once he heard laughter from men returning from town. Their horses slowed near the church, then moved on. The church windows were black. Isaiah reached the side door and worked the latch with the same strip of iron he had used at Vale's office. The door gave after several minutes. It opened with a low groan that sounded too loud in the rain. Isaiah waited, one hand on the frame, listening. No voice. No movement, only water. He slipped inside. The sanctuary smelled of damp wood, wax, and old cloth. On Sundays, this room taught submission with clean hands. Tonight, it stood empty and exposed. The pulpit looked smaller without Calloway behind it. The pews looked less holy. Institutions often do. Remove the audience, remove the ceremony, and what remains is furniture and control. Isaiah crossed to the office. The cabinet was locked. He expected that. Calloway was a cautious man, but cautious men trust locks too much. Isaiah searched the desk first, then the shelf, then the drawer beneath the inkstand. He found the key wrapped in a handkerchief inside a tobacco tin, not hidden from thieves, hidden from servants. That distinction mattered. Calloway did not fear criminals. He feared the people he had wronged learning to read. Isaiah opened the cabinet. The ledger was large, bound in dark leather, its corners worn from years of handling. It was heavier than he expected. He carried it to the desk and opened it under the narrow light of a covered candle he had brought in his pocket. The pages were neat. Calloway's hand was fine, disciplined, almost beautiful. That made the violence worse. There was no rage in the ink, no haste. No trembling, just order, baptisms, marriages, burials, transfers, manumissions. There, near the back, Isaiah found the entry, removed under lawful manumission and Christian protection. 17 names followed. But they were not the 17 names Isaiah knew. Naomi Bell was written as Naomi Vale, age 24, no dependents. Ruth Bell appeared 2 lines below as Ruth, age 12, domestic capacity. Moses Bell was entered as Moses, approximate age 50, no family connection recorded. Lydia Carter was written as Liddy, age 19, single woman. Samuel Carter and Ben Carter were separated by 3 pages, entered under different dates, as though they had not left together and had never belonged to each other. Josiah Green was listed as Joseph Green, age 18. Isaiah stared at that one for a long time. A boy had been made older by ink. A child had been made movable. A mother had been stripped of her child. A wife had been made single. A family had been cut apart without rope, without iron, without a raised voice. Just handwriting. This was the cleanest room in the parish, and it was full of violence. Isaiah turned back through the ledger. The truth began to show itself in layers, blank spaces where pages had been scraped, names written over older names, dates adjusted, entries inserted between earlier lines in a smaller hand. He found other notations from previous months and even previous years, removed, transferred, placed under protection. Sent by arrangement, no destination written, no receiving household, no confirming witness, just disappearance dressed in lawful language. The 17 from Vale Plantation were not the beginning. They were the newest page in a practice already tested. Isaiah copied what he could. He worked fast, but not carelessly. He wrote in his own small notebook, bending close to the flame. Naomi Bell, changed to Naomi Vale. Ruth Bell, age altered. Lydia Carter, marriage erased. Samuel and Ben Carter, brotherhood erased. Moses Bell, kinship erased. Josiah Green, age altered. Then he searched the desk again. The locked drawer resisted longer. He nearly left it. Then he remembered the way Calloway had held the satchel at Vale Plantation, close against his body, as if the papers inside carried more danger than scripture. Isaiah forced the drawer with the iron tool. Inside were letters, not many, enough. They were tied with black thread, folded in careful squares, and marked with initials instead of full names. EV for Edmund Vale, SC for Silas Calloway. Another set of initials appeared repeatedly. MR. Isaiah did not yet know the man, but the river would. Men who moved people after midnight always had names that stayed outside the respectable record. The letters were not written plainly. Cowards often invent refined language for ugly work. They spoke of souls transferred. They spoke of burdens removed. They spoke of unsettled persons placed beyond inquiry. They spoke of papers prepared in advance of movement. One line froze Isaiah's hand over the page. Once a soul is recorded as free, no man will ask where the body has gone. There it was, the whole machine reduced to one sentence, not a misunderstanding, not a mercy corrupted by greed, a theory of disappearance. Freedom itself had been turned into camouflage. The word that should have opened the door had been used to close the search. Once the church said a person was free, no planter had to admit he had sold them. No sheriff would look for them as stolen property. No neighbor would ask too many questions. No buyer downstream needed to care what name they had carried before. The record did not merely hide the crime, the record performed it. Isaiah copied the sentence exactly. His hand did not shake until after the words were written. He found more blank certificates beneath the letters. Each one bore Calloway's seal. Some had signatures already prepared. Empty spaces waited for names, ages, descriptions, destinations that would never be checked. A stack of future ghosts. He counted them. 24. Vale had 17 taken the first night. Now 24 more spaces waited. Isaiah understood then that the second batch was larger than he had feared. It was not only men of working age, it was women, children, people who could be separated cleanly because the paper would make separation official before anyone reached the river. He replaced the letters as best he could, but not all of them. He took one short note bearing Vale's initials and Calloway's reply. Taking it was dangerous, leaving with nothing was worse. A copied word could be denied. A stolen letter could be recognized by the hand that wrote it. As he closed the ledger, he noticed a final page folded into the back cover, not part of the book. A working list. Names from Vale Plantation. Some were crossed out. 17 of them. Below those, new names had been written. Dinah, Peter, Rose. Little Thomas, Grace, Abel, Hannah, 2 entire cabin families. And beside several children's names, Calloway had already written alternate spellings. Not mistakes, preparations. Isaiah felt something colder than fear. A man can fear what might happen. This was different. This was the moment before history repeats itself, when the ink is wet and the victims are still asleep. He copied the second list. Then he blew out the candle, returned the ledger, and left the church office with the letter hidden beneath his shirt. The rain had not stopped. He walked back before dawn, through mud and ditch water, carrying proof that no court would accept from him, and no white man in power would hear, without first asking how he had obtained it. That was another cruelty of the world he lived in. Truth from a black mouth was treated as theft, even when the thing stolen was evidence of a crime. By sunrise, he was back in the quarters. He did not sleep. There was no time. He found Dinah first, behind her cabin, washing a pot in rainwater. She was a mother of 3, with a face that had learned to hide panic quickly. "They wrote your name," Isaiah said. She looked at him. "Who?" "Calloway." "Vale." The pot slipped slightly in her hands. Isaiah told her enough. Not all. Enough to make her listen and not enough to make her cry out. He told her if anyone asked the children's names again, she was to give the wrong ones. Not the wrong names at random. Names they would remember. Names they could answer to if forced. Names that would not match the preacher's list. Dinah stared at him as if he had asked her to wound her own children. "A name is all they got left," she said. Isaiah's answer was quiet. "Then hide the true one where they cannot reach it." That was the kind of choice slavery made people face. Not good against evil. Evil had already chosen the field. The choice was often between 2 injuries: lose the name now in secret or have it stolen later forever. He went next to Rose, then to Hannah's grandmother, then to Abel's brother. Each conversation was short. Each one had to sound like ordinary talk if overheard. A warning folded into work. A strategy disguised as complaint. A rescue plan built out of whispers. By evening, Isaiah had begun a second section in his notebook. Hidden names. He wrote the real name first, then the false name to be given under pressure, then the person entrusted to remember the truth. Dinah's son Thomas became Tom Reed for the plantation office, but in Isaiah's book he remained Thomas Bell, Dinah's child. Grace became Gracie Lou for Calloway's hearing, but her true name stayed Grace Ann of the East Cabin. Peter became Pete No Kin, the kind of cruel shorthand a ledger would accept, but Isaiah wrote, "Peter, brother of Rose, son of Mariah, taken from Bayou Lafourche." This was not confusion, it was defense. If Vale and Calloway were hunting by record, Isaiah would poison the record. If they needed clean names, he would make the names uncertain. If they erased family ties, he would write them twice. If they made ghosts, he would leave a map for the living. That night he opened the notebook beneath a dim flame and placed Calloway's stolen letter between the pages. The lines still seemed to burn through the paper. "Once a soul is recorded as free, no man will ask where the body has gone." Isaiah answered it in his own hand. "Then I will write where the body came from. I will write who loved it. I will write the name they had before thieves touched the ink." Outside, the quarters were quiet, but not asleep. Mothers had begun whispering new names to children. Grandmothers repeated old names under their breath. Men watched the road without appearing to watch it. The plantation still stood. Vale still held the office. Calloway still held the church ledger. The river still waited beyond the trees, but the machine had met something it had not counted on. A man it called property had become an archive. And in a world built to erase black memory, Isaiah had begun to make forgetting more difficult. The second freedom was scheduled for a Thursday night. That was not what Edmund Vale called it, of course. Men like Vale did not name their crimes directly. They wrapped them in soft language until the shape disappeared. In the plantation office, he called it a transfer. Reverend Calloway called it an act of protection. The rivermen called it a run. The ledger called it S5. In the quarters, Isaiah called it what it was, the next taking. By then he had the names, Dinah and her 3 children, Rose and her brother Peter, Abel, who worked near the mill, Grace Ann from the East Cabin, Hannah's grandmother, 2 boys from the Cane Rose, a mother whose husband had been sold 3 years before and who still set aside food for him on Sundays because grief has its own calendar. 24 in all. Some had already been approached quietly. Vale did not speak to them himself at first. He let hope prepare the ground. A house servant was told to mention that another group might soon be allowed to leave. Calloway preached about doors opening in the wilderness. The overseer became strangely gentle with certain families. Small signs appeared, each one arranged to feel like providence. That was how the trap worked. it did not begin with force. It began with relief. Isaiah moved faster than he had ever moved in his life, but he moved carefully. A warning given too loudly could become a confession. A warning given too late could become an epitaph. He spoke to Dinah first. She had already been told to prepare her children. "Do not go," Isaiah said. She kept her hands in the wash water. "You know this?" "I know enough." "Enough is not a place," she said. "No," Isaiah answered. "But the river is worse." She looked at him then. Her face did not break, it tightened. "They told me my children would sleep in a free house." They told Naomi the same. The name did the work. Dinah lowered her head, and for a moment all the sound left her body. Then she nodded once. "What do I do?" "Give them the false names if asked. Keep the little ones near the back wall after dark. If shouting starts, take the ditch road behind the smokehouse. Do not run toward the ferry. Run toward the swamp." He went next to Rose. She did not believe him. Not at first. Rose was 19 and had already survived too much disappointment to trust fear more than hope. She wanted the promise to be true. That must be said plainly. Desperation does not make people foolish. It makes the lie sharper. A person denied freedom long enough may reach for even the hand that hides a knife. "Maybe Naomi sent no word because she is safe," Rose said. Isaiah showed her the green bead from the river mud. Rose knew it. Everyone knew Ruth's beads. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came. He showed her the torn cloth from Naomi's scarf. Then the copied line from Calloway's letter. "Once a soul is recorded as free, no man will ask where the body has gone." Rose read slowly. Her lips moved over the words. She had learned some letters from Isaiah in secret. Enough to understand the sentence, enough to feel the full weight of it. "They wrote that?" she asked. "Yes, about us, about anyone they can move." That night, Isaiah gathered 5 trusted people inside Moses Bell's empty cabin. The cabin had not been used since the first disappearance. That made it dangerous. It also made it fitting. Crimes leave rooms behind, and sometimes those rooms become witnesses. Dinah came with her oldest boy. Rose came with Peter. Abel came last, after making sure no white man had followed him from the mill. Hannah's grandmother sat by the hearth, one hand on her cane, eyes fixed on Isaiah. He laid out the plan. No speeches, no grand rebellion. No fantasy of overpowering the plantation. Isaiah knew the world they were in. He knew the guns were in the main house. He knew patrols watched the roads. He knew the law would arrive to protect Vale long before it arrived to hear the enslaved. So the plan was narrow: a fire near the sugar mill, loose horses from the stable, a broken wagon pin hidden before dusk, children moved before the bell. Families split into 3 directions, not one. The swamp path for those who could run, the old burial ground for those who needed cover, the drainage ditch for mothers with small children. Confusion was the only weapon they had. Confusion, and the fact that men like Vale expected fear to obey. Thursday came under a yellow sky. All day the plantation felt wrong. The field assignments were changed. Certain people were kept close to the quarters. The selected families were given lighter work, as if Vale wanted their bodies uninjured for travel. Calloway arrived before sundown with his leather satchel. 2 rivermen came after dark and waited near the storehouse. The overseer checked the road more than once. Isaiah saw all of it. He also saw the doubt among the chosen. Some believed him now, some did not. That was the wound inside the wound. He could not make freedom less desirable. He could not ask people to stop wanting rescue simply because evil had learned to imitate it. One old woman whispered that even if the road was dangerous, staying was certain misery. A young man said he would rather risk the river than die in Cain. A mother held her child and asked Isaiah whether he could promise safety if they ran. He could not. Truth, unlike lies, often arrives without comfort. Near 10 o'clock, Reverend Calloway stood at the edge of the quarters with his Bible open. The chosen were ordered to gather. Vale wore a dark coat. His face was calm. Too calm. He looked over the people assembled before him, and for one brief moment Isaiah saw the ledger in the man's eyes. Not faces, not kin, entries. Calloway began to pray. His voice was steady. "Lord, guide these souls through danger." A horse screamed from the stable, then another, then the sharp crack of a lantern hitting wood. Fire rose near the sugar mill, sudden and bright. Not large enough to destroy the building, large enough to make every white man turn. The overseer cursed and ran. 2 drivers left the wagon. The rivermen reached for pistols. Then the horses broke loose. 3 of them came out of the stable yard wild-eyed, reins dragging, hooves striking sparks from the packed ground. One slammed into a wagon shaft. The damaged pin gave way. The front axle dropped hard into the dirt. For 10 seconds, the plantation lost its order. 10 seconds can be a door. Dinah moved first. She took the 2 youngest children by the wrists and pulled them behind the smokehouse. Her oldest boy followed, dragging a sack that held nothing but cornmeal and a shirt. Rose grabbed Peter and ran toward the burial ground. Abel moved in the opposite direction, shouting as if trying to catch a horse, while using his body to block the view of 2 women slipping into the ditch road. Isaiah did not run, not yet. He moved toward Grace Ann, who stood frozen beside the wagon. She was 12, old enough to understand danger, young enough for fear to root her feet to the earth. "Now," Isaiah said. She looked at him. "Now!" She ran. Calloway shouted her name, but it was the wrong name, the false one. That saved her half a second. He shouted again, correcting himself too late. Vale turned. For the first time, the gentleman's face broke, not with fear, with insult. That was what enraged him. Not suffering, not danger, not the possibility of death, but disobedience. The machine had failed to move smoothly, and the people he had filed into categories were acting like human beings. "Stop them," he ordered. Men ran into the dark. 2 shots cracked toward the swampline. No one knew if they struck anything. A child cried out near the ditch, then was hushed. The fire near the mill spread along dry cane trash, sending smoke across the yard. In that smoke, some escaped. Some were seized. Some vanished into the trees and would not be counted again until years later, if they survived long enough to speak. Isaiah turned toward the office. He needed the notebook moved. He had hidden it too near his cabin. If Vale suspected him, the cabin would be searched first. He crossed the yard low, under smoke, behind panicked horses and shouting men. He reached his doorway and lifted the floorboard. The notebook was there. Names, proof, letters. Codes, Ruth's bead, Naomi's cloth, the only grave marker some of them might ever have. He wrapped it in oilcloth, tied it with cord, and moved to the rear corner of the cabin. There, beneath a packed section of floor near the wall, he dug quickly with the iron tool. Not deep, deep enough. He placed the bundle inside, covered it, pressed dirt flat with his palm, and dragged a broken stool over the spot. When he stood, the overseer was in the doorway. Behind him stood 2 men from the river. Isaiah did not reach for the tool. There would have been no use. They dragged him outside. Vale met him near the office steps. The fire had been contained. Smoke still hung low. Several of the selected people had been captured and forced to kneel near the wagon. Others were missing. The broken axle leaned in the dirt like a failed sentence. Calloway stood beside Vale, breathing hard, his Bible closed in one hand. Vale looked at Isaiah for a long moment. "You did this." Isaiah said nothing. "You think you have saved them?" Still nothing. Vale stepped closer. History is not made by what people whisper in cabins. It is made by records, deeds, certificates, ledgers, courts, men who can sign their names. He spoke quietly, but every word was meant to cut. No one will believe you. Isaiah lifted his eyes. That was dangerous. He did it anyway. Then why are you afraid? The blow came fast, not from Vale, from the overseer. Isaiah went down to one knee. He tasted blood, but the scene did not blur. He saw Calloway's shoes, clean, even after the mud. He saw the preacher shift away from him, as if guilt might stain leather. Calloway said, "Pride has led you into rebellion." Isaiah looked at him. "You wrote children into ghosts." The preacher's face tightened. "I wrote what order required." That was the confession, though no court would name it so. Order, the favorite word of men who profit from suffering and call the suffering disorder when it resists. Vale gave instructions. Isaiah was to be confined until morning. Then he would be moved, not sold locally, not punished before witnesses. Moved, that word again. The same clean word used for the 17, the same word waiting inside the S5 entry. They tied his hands and took him to the storehouse. As they pushed him inside, he heard a sound from beyond the quarters, a child's cry, far off, then a woman's whisper calling the child lower. Not captured, not near, somewhere past the ditch road, alive. Isaiah closed his eyes. Not from relief. Relief was too large a word. From recognition. The plan had not saved everyone. It had broken the machine's perfect silence. That mattered. Before dawn, the captured were loaded under heavier guard, fewer than Vale had planned. The second batch had been wounded by absence. Some names on Calloway's certificates now belonged to people who had fled into darkness under other names. Some children on the list would not answer when called. Some family ties had been hidden where ink could not reach them. Isaiah was brought out last. His hands were bound. His face was swollen. He walked without being dragged. As they led him toward the river road, he turned once toward the quarters. His cabin stood quiet. The floor inside looked undisturbed from the doorway. Vale's men had not found it. Beneath the dirt, the notebook waited. That was all Isaiah had left to do, carry the truth as far as he could, and when he could carry it no longer, leave it where the earth might keep it better than men. The war came as men had promised it would, though promises from powerful men rarely arrived in the form the powerless needed. It came with uniforms, rumors, burned storehouses, empty roads, and soldiers passing through with papers of their own. It came with arguments in town and hunger in the quarters. It came with the collapse of old certainties, but not quickly enough to save everyone. Vale Plantation changed before it ended. The sugar mill stood idle for weeks at a time. The fields grew uneven. Some men fled, some were taken, some waited because they had nowhere to go and because freedom, even when approaching, still had to cross roads guarded by men with guns. Edmund Vale survived the worst of it. That must be said plainly. Men like him often did. He lost money, then recovered it. He complained of disorder, then adapted to it. He presented himself after the war as a man who had always understood history's direction. In parlors and offices, he spoke of restraint. He spoke of difficult times. He spoke of Christian duty. He allowed people to remember him as complicated, which is the word polite society often uses when it does not want to say guilty. Reverend Silas Calloway also survived. His church remained standing. His pulpit remained polished. His ledger remained in the cabinet behind the sanctuary. After emancipation, he changed his language with the ease of a man who had never believed words were sacred. He preached reconciliation. He spoke of healing. He told white congregations that all men must move forward. Forward is a useful direction when the past contains your handwriting. The 17 from Vale Plantation remained recorded as freed persons sent away under protection. The second taking was recorded less cleanly because Isaiah had broken it. Some names were missing, some descriptions did not match. Some children had vanished into swamp roads under false names. Their mothers whispered through the dark. That confusion saved lives. It also wounded memory. Years passed. Cabins emptied for different reasons. Some people left because they could. Some because the land gave them nothing. Some because staying near the place of their loss felt like living inside a locked room. Families searched for wives, husbands, children, parents, brothers, and names. They searched plantations, labor camps, church books, military records, river towns, and graveyards with wooden markers already falling into the earth. Most found nothing. This was not because there was no truth to find. It was because the truth had been processed before they ever began looking. Naomi Bell did not appear as Naomi Bell in the church book. Ruth Bell did not appear as Naomi's child. Lydia Carter had been made unmarried by ink. Samuel and Ben Carter had been separated on paper before the river separated them, in fact. Josiah Green had been aged into a false manhood, as though making a boy older in a ledger could excuse what had been done to him. The official record did not lose them. It betrayed them. There is a difference. In the winter after the war, a small group of freed people returned to the ruins of Vale Plantation. They did not come as visitors. They came as witnesses. Among them were women who had once lived in the East Row cabins, 2 men who had escaped during the fire near the mill, and a young woman who had been known for years by a name that never sat right in her mouth. She had been called Rachel in the place where she grew up, but sometimes, in sleep, she heard another name, Ruth. She remembered very little from the night of the first taking, a lantern covered in blue cloth, her mother's shoulder beneath her cheek, wheels moving without sound, a preacher's voice. Mud near a river, a hand pressing something into her palm, then another place, another name, another woman telling her not to speak of before. Memory in a stolen child does not return as a full story. It returns as fragments sharp enough to cut. A song, a bead, a smell of wet rope. A mother's hand. At Vale Plantation, the main house had already begun to decay. The roof sagged on one side. The office windows were broken. Vines had climbed the steps. But the cabins still stood in the quarters, some leaning, some open to rain, some with floors half rotted through. Isaiah's cabin was the smallest at the end of the row. No marker named it. No white record preserved what he had done there. To the plantation papers, he had likely been transferred, sold, lost, or simply removed. Systems that erase people rarely bother to describe the eraser. The group entered near dusk. The young woman who carried the name Rachel stood at the doorway and stopped. She did not know why. The room was empty. A broken stool lay near the back wall. Dirt covered most of the floor. There was no bed, no blanket, no sign of the man who had once written by candlelight beneath that roof. One of the older women, Dinah, was with them. She had survived the second night because Isaiah told her to run toward the swamp. Her 2 youngest children survived with her. Her oldest son did not. That was how survival often looked after slavery, not victory, but a table with one chair forever empty. Dinah stepped inside and looked toward the rear corner. "He kept things," she said. The others turned to her. "What things? Names?" No one spoke. Dinah took a broken piece of wood and began scraping at the packed dirt near the wall. A man helped her, then another. The floor was hard but not deep. After several minutes, the wood struck something that was not earth. They dug with hands. Oilcloth appeared first, blackened with age but still holding shape, then cord. Then a bundle. No one opened it quickly. There are moments when the living understand that what they hold is not an object. It is a grave, a witness, and an accusation at the same time. Dinah untied the cord. Inside was the notebook. The pages were stained but readable. Isaiah's hand remained steady across most of it. Real names, false names. Births, kinship, warnings, shipping marks, the copied sentence from Calloway's letter, the S4 code, the S5 code, Naomi's cloth, folded thin, Ruth's green bead wrapped in a scrap, a child's identity held for years in darkness because no institution above ground had been honest enough to keep it. The young woman stared at the bead. Her hand went to her wrist. She did not remember owning it. Then she did, not fully. Not cleanly, but enough. A flash of her mother's fingers tying the beads. A voice saying, "Hold still, Ruth." A laugh, a cabin. A night, a road. Dinah read from the notebook, Naomi Bell, mother of Ruth Bell. The young woman made a sound then, small and involuntary. Not a scream, not a sob, something older than both. For years she had carried a missing space inside her and been told it was nothing. Now the space had a name. Ruth Bell. Her name had not died at the river. Isaiah had kept it. They read the 17 aloud, one by one. Naomi Bell. Ruth Bell, Moses Bell, Lydia Carter, Samuel Carter, Ben Carter, Josiah Green. The others followed, each name entering the cabin, like someone coming home late from a journey that never should have happened. No bodies returned. No court opened. No preacher confessed. No plantation owner was dragged from a grave and made to answer. History is rarely that generous. But the names returned. That mattered. Not enough. But it mattered. The notebook revealed the shape of the crime. Edmund Vale had used the appearance of manumission to remove people from his records. Reverend Calloway had altered the church ledger to make the removal look clean. Rivermen had carried the stolen under shipping marks, disguised as sugar loss. Buyers farther south had received people whose past had been cut away before arrival, and Isaiah, an enslaved man the system considered property, had done what courts, churches, newspapers, and respectable citizens refused to do. He had recorded the truth. He had understood that slavery did not only steal labor, it stole family. It stole childhood. It stole the right to remain attached to your own mother, your own child, your own name. But this conspiracy had attempted something even colder. It tried to steal the proof that people had ever existed as themselves. That is why Isaiah's notebook was dangerous. Not because it named suffering. America has always known how to look at suffering and call it unfortunate. The notebook named responsibility. It connected the polite owner to the river landing, the preacher to the false record, the ledger to the missing child, the language of mercy to the machinery of sale. That is the part buried histories are built to prevent. Ruth Bell took the green bead from the cloth and held it in her palm. No one told her what to feel. No one had that right. She had been a child when her name was taken. She was a woman when it was returned. There is no ceremony large enough to repair that distance. Dinah closed the notebook and placed her hand on its cover. "He said names could wait," she whispered. "If the children lived, the truth could wait." The truth had waited. Under dirt, under silence, under the floor of a cabin that white men never thought worth searching. By then, Edmund Vale was remembered by some as a troubled gentleman of his era. Reverend Calloway was remembered by some as a preacher who helped souls through dangerous times. Their defenders would have called the evidence complicated. They would have asked for context. They would have spoken of war, confusion, imperfect records, and the difficulty of judging dead men. But some acts do not become unclear because time passes. A child was renamed. A mother was erased. A preacher altered the book. An owner signed the lie. A river carried people away from the names that loved them. They freed them at night. Then they sold their names. But one man wrote the truth beneath the floor, and the earth kept it until the living were ready to hear it. If this story stayed with you, subscribe to the channel and comment where you're listening from. Your city, your state, your country. And tell me your theory. How many names like these were changed, buried, or erased before anyone had the power to write them back? Do you believe Isaiah's notebook revealed the whole truth, or only the small part that survived? Share your thoughts below, because history is not silent. It is waiting for someone to ask the right question.